Hey, Yeardley.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, really good. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you, likewise.
A couple things. First of all, I was, reading some stuff about your podcast, Small Town Dicks, and when I clicked it, I wanted to see what you look like because I watch The Simpsons forever, and you don't normally know the faces of the voices. People do that with me, too, on the radio show. Sometimes they're like, I had no idea what you look like. However, I used to watch Herman's Head like crazy. That was one of my favorite shows. And I was like, holy crap, I know her from Herman's Head.
Yes.
Wow, look at that. So anyway, I guess I'm a bigger fan than I even thought, so it's really nice to talk to you.
That's so nice. Thank you.
I want to start with your podcast because I've just now got into listening to the true crime stuff, mostly because of my girlfriend. She's a big true crime podcaster, and I was like, man, I don't know about this stuff. But I find myself a little bit caring too much now. I was listening to one called Bear Brook or something, and it didn't have an end. The podcast didn't have an end. So your podcast, Small Town Dicks, these are true stories, right?
That's right.
Now, who are the people investigating each episode, each story?
Well, I co-host the podcast with identical twin detectives, Dan and Dave. And all of the cases that we cover on the podcast are told by the detective who investigated that case. And it came about because I'm actually engaged to Dan, Detective Dan. And when I started dating him, I never dated anybody in law enforcement. And he would come home, and actually we were long distance for about 2.5 years. And so when I would go see him, his day-to-day was so jaw-dropping. It was so like, I'm sorry, what? I mean, the mere notion that the minute you leave your house, first of all, you're going towards all of the things that the rest of us run from. And second of all, somebody might really willfully want to harm you is just a completely foreign idea to me. Like, when I leave the house, I go to do a pretty fantastic special job, but nobody's trying to kill me. So when the podcast came about, it just seemed like a natural fit that all of the cases should be told by the detectives who actually investigated them, because in the podcast space, not so much in the TV space, but you didn't have a lot of first-hand accounts like that. And you had a lot of, if you do listen to true crime, there's a lot of rehashing of very famous crimes. And so we really wanted to illustrate the fact that big-time crime is happening in small towns everywhere, just with less frequency, but the same level of reckless disregard for humanity and depravity, and it's kind of shocking. And because I remember when I would say to people, I'm dating a detective from a small town, like, what does he do, like rescue cats in trees and stuff? You're like, no, actually, there's murder, and there's, burglary and robbery, and horrible things happen. So it just was a really interesting perspective, I think, on law enforcement. And also one of the artifacts of small-town police departments is that they are expected to deliver the same high level of work product as a big city agency, but with many fewer resources. So, if you're on the SWAT team, you're a detective probably too. And so in the back of your car, if your patrol car, you have your, flak vest and your long rifle and your helmet. Like, now it's a SWAT call. It's just a very, very different animal than the 50 SWAT guys sitting in Los Angeles, where I live, waiting for something huge to happen, So I find it endlessly fascinating. And on my side of the table, because I'm the civilian, I also want to know, if you are the person who's going to see the worst of humanity every day, where does that reside inside of you, in order for you to also be able to be a father, a husband, a partner in some way to some, other human being on the planet? Where do you put it?
Okay, that leads me to a lot of questions. I'm going to go with this one first, where they're twins and they're both in law enforcement?
Yeah. And they hit the same agency, and they worked. Dan is now retired, but they worked literally across the bullpen from each other. But, Bobby, when I tell you, there were only 9 detectives in the whole agency for this small town.
And 2 of them were your yes. Fiance and his twin, not even just his brother who passed it on down to him, his twin brother who made the conscious decision at the same time they wanted to be. That's crazy to me.
I know. They're identical twins. They're actually what they call mirror twins. So Dan is right-handed and Dave is left-handed. They both played baseball. Dan played minor league baseball for the Cubs. Dave was a pitcher, and then he blew out his arm before he got to professional ball. But it is fascinating dating a twin. I don't know if you've ever dated a twin, but they really do have this shorthand. They can kind of read each other's minds. It's kind of great. I love Dave. I love me some Detective Dave so much.
On this podcast, because you've now completed the 6th season, and this is a very successful podcast, and I'm only coming to it because I just now got into true crime. Like this world has been open to me recently. So at the end of each episode, is the crime being solved? Some of them, not all of them. How did these things end, or is that something you talk about?
Yes, we do. We actually only cover adjudicated cases because a lot of our detectives who come on the show are still working, and we never want them to, for instance, be testifying in a trial and have the defense attorney say, "Oh, so you're part of that podcast, so you're here to sensationalize crime," and nor do we want them to compromise the investigation in any way. So all of the cases, I don't think we've never actually covered a case that was unsolved.
I like that, honestly, because, again, I listened to one. I tell you, I listened, Yeardley, to 5 episodes of this dang thing, and at the end of it, they were like, and we still don't know. And I was like, why did I just spend 5.5 hours? There's no conclusion.
It's so frustrating. You know what's funny that you say that? I started to watch this show, I think it's on a travel channel. It's like a true crime show, but they have a medium and then they have a detective. And the medium doesn't talk to the detective until they've both done their investigations of usually some haunted house, right? The people who live there are so freaked out and they don't know there's like an evil spirit. And so they usually yes, the medium who's quite good, it seems, and really does nail a lot of stuff. And then they go to the homeowners and they do their findings and they go, yeah, so you probably should get somebody in here to exercise and then, exercise the dwelling or whatever. And then you see a chyron that says they're still looking for a priest to come and exercise the dwelling. Activity is still happening. I'm like, how could you do that? How could you not help these people get rid of this massive thing that's terrifying them? I really feel cheated. It's just so wrong.
Do you know what that show's called? That would be interesting to watch.
Oh, it is. I do. I'll look it up.
Take a second to Google it.
Yeah, it's quite good.
Well, I'll say this.
And what's interesting that you say you're a girlfriend, and I was creeping on you on Instagram. I follow you, and you have great pictures. You guys and you're a gorgeous couple.
Oh, thanks. That's mostly her. I'm just the funny guy. Yeah.
We all need funny, Bobby. And so most of or a large portion of our audience, over 70%, is women, and that's true for most of true crime.
Why is it that balanced, pretty healthy, she's emotionally stable, except she wants to hear a podcast where people have been cut up and stuffed into a barrel? And I'm like, what? Like, everything about you is right on, except 2 kids. We couldn't find their heads. Only 3 toes remained. Who could it be? And then here I am 2 days later going, all right, we're going to find the end of this episode. We still don't know. All right, goodbye, everybody. Like, what the?
I think part of it is that most of the crimes happen to women, and that there's a kind of cautionary, voyeuristic, there but for the grace of God go I. And what if I was in this situation, what would I do? And can I learn from the mistakes and the successes of the people to whom these things have happened?
Well, she's now starting to learn a bit of self-defense. I don't think she wants to fight people, but I think if someone, she's learning how, if someone's coming in the house, what to do with the door. It has also scared her into learning how to protect herself. So I guess in the end, a full circle is a benefit that she listens to these, because she's so freaked out that now she's learning. You're with your fiance, right? That's what you said earlier.
Yes.
With your fiance being in law enforcement, does he teach you some of these little things too? Like, hey, if someone grabs you, or is he just like, I'm going to be there, don't worry about it? Both. But
for instance, he's off coaching first base for an independent minor league baseball team this summer, which he's done for a couple of summers now because he still loves baseball and he's super good at it. So when he's not here, he's like, okay, here's the drill. And so I have, I want you to lock yourself in this room if something should happen. Of course, set the alarm at night. If somebody did attack you, go for the eyes. Kick them, like kick, scream, fight like your life depends on it, because it might. Scream. And then all kinds of things. Like I learned never to leave anything in my car, and I kind of didn't really leave anything in my car ever. He said, not even a charger, or don't let them even see the wire of your phone charger, because they will break into your car on the possibility that maybe there's a device somewhere, maybe in the center console, maybe something. And so I never leave anything in my car. It's been quite, and I think having done this true crime podcast now, I see things through a more suspicious lens. I'm certainly a little more aware of my surroundings. But Dan, when we go to a restaurant, if the restaurant's super busy or we're out somewhere, his head is on a swivel. And very early on, I was like, what is your deal, dude? What about, like, hello, I'd like a little attention. He's like, I'm sorry. It's just, now it's my default. He's got eyes everywhere, always looking for the potential threat. It's quite fascinating.
Do you have nightmares after these podcasts? Because I get nightmares. I can't watch scary movies. I tried to read Twilight. I had nightmares. But if you're covering these crimes, are you ever asleep thinking about this crap and you're waking up with your heart just beating like this? I'm anxious anyway, so yes. I'm always afraid my fear is somebody's going to break into the house and I'll realize it too late. Like they'll be standing over my bed by the time I figure out that somebody is in the house. But it's interesting because I also edit. We have two actual editors who put the podcast into Pro Tools, but I edit on paper and give notes. And you then sort of switch it to literally the other side of your brain, the more analytical, less emotional side of your brain, in order to make sure that everything is lining up. Sometimes, because we're not dealing with professional storytellers, sometimes they'll tell you the end in the first 5 minutes, and you're like, great, that's okay. We're just going to move that back a little and wait to minute 17. So create a little suspense here, but never change the story. But again, sometimes just rearrange the puzzle pieces. And so my job as the editor is to make sure, because you have to remember always that pretty much 99% of your audience is doing something else while they listen to your podcast. So they're gardening, they're walking the dog, they're going on their daily walk, they're driving, they're cooking. And so my job is to make sure that you can still follow the story, even if I don't have all of your attention. And if you miss something, you're still interested enough to go back 15 seconds and go, hang on. And then you go back and pick up where you left off. That's a good tip.
So it's really, so that helps kind of, it's a terrible thing to say, but disassociate from the horror of it, because it really, you just go, people are horrible to each other. People are awful.
I agree. I watched the first episode of the Jeffrey Epstein thing last night on Netflix, and I watched it, and I was like, I don't know if I can do any more of this.
I couldn't do it, Bobby. I'm so with you.
It was just, I've watched, some of that serial killer stuff, and I was intrigued enough to finish the whole thing. But the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, for some reason, I felt so deeply sad that I thought, why would I keep watching this and continue to feel this way?
Yeah.
And what I felt is nothing compared to what they felt. It was just,
it
was the only time I'd listened to something like that, or watched something like that and felt that way. Because when I watched the Ted Bundy thing, I was like, give me another episode. Can't hit. And I don't know why I am so intrigued by that part of it. That would be like your podcast type thing, but not like the Jeffrey Epstein thing. Yeah.
I think, I completely agree with you, and I feel like the thing about people like Ted Bundy is he seemed to work so hard to create a persona that was the complete opposite of who he really was, and Jeffrey Epstein did nothing to try to conceal that.
Did you finish it, or did you watch?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, my girlfriend too was like, I can't do any more of this. So anyway, I don't want to talk. Can I ask you some Lisa Simpson questions?
Yeah, I love Lisa Simpson.
Okay, well, so I'm going to let my producer, because I'm a Simpsons fan. I grew up in the 80s. I mean, I was born in the 80s, so obviously it was a big part of my life. But Mike D here is the biggest that I ever know. He's my producer. He's got 3 questions for you that he wants to ask specifically. Mike, say hi.
Hey, Yeardley, it's Mike.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Big fan. I actually just read Mike Reese's book, Springfield Confidential.
Isn't it great?
It was so good.
I learned so much about the show from that book.
Yeah, the story I love that he told in there was about the Michael Jackson episode where he came in, read his lines, but then he brought in like an authorized impersonator to do like the actual song in the episode.
Yep.
Do you
Can you imagine being, so he was this lovely, young, little white guy, and Michael Jackson had handpicked him to sing like Michael Jackson in front of Michael Jackson. Can you imagine doing an impersonation of the artists themselves right in front of them?
Do you have somebody like that, like a designated impersonator, if you ever get sick, to do Lisa Simpson?
No, actually. But we do have a guy, his name is Chris Edgerly, and he does all kinds of voices for video games for the most part, but he'll fill in for whoever is sick that day, mostly the guys, because the guys do, multiple voices, but he'll also fill in for me, and how would I love to be a fly on the wall, pretend like, not sick, just came to see Chris do me.
What I love about Lisa is, like, I kind of identified with her a lot growing up just because she was, smart, didn't have a whole lot of friends, but she also had, like, these lines that almost didn't fit her personality.
Yeah.
Was there ever like a fight you had of like, okay, I don't think Lisa Simpson would actually say this?
Yes. There's one incident that I remember very early on where they had, I think it might have been, there's an episode called Lisa's Pony, which was in the first 10 years. It was a wonderful episode where Homer ends up working 3 jobs in order for Lisa to be able to have a pony. And in the original draft, she kind of had a crush on the stable boy, and I just felt like it was much too mature, much too sexual, this kind of her infatuation with this kid, and I'm like, this isn't right. Like this, I'm not cool with this. I don't feel comfortable with this, and so they changed it, and it just became much more sort of goofy and sweet, and as I think it should be. For God's sake, she's 8, right? But I will say, again, rare occasions, because they really get it right 99% of the time, but 2 things I object to. 1, people being really, really mean to Lisa Simpson and her having no recourse. There was a whole, we had a couple of showrunners who, when Homer got really, really goofy and really stupid for a few years, he would also often be quite mean to Lisa, and I'm like, that's not right. I'm not okay with that. Like, I need to stand up for my girl. And really the point was, even if I didn't win the battle, it was important that I fight the fight. And they would usually, for the most part, we would be able to reach a compromise on things like that. But my premise is that mean humor is lazy humor, and it's much harder to write something that's really witty and incisive and memorable, as opposed to just hurling insults at somebody. I feel like we can do better than that.
All right, one last question. I'm sure people ask you to, do the voice all the time, but Lisa Simpson never had a catchphrase. If there was like one line that you remember from the show to pick as a catchphrase, what would it have been?
Well, it's probably, I am the Lizard Queen. It is so sad that Lisa Simpson doesn't have a catchphrase. I mean, it's kind of heartbreaking. Bart has like 15 of them. You can't give one to my girl. The other one that people cite is, I'll be in my room. Which is was a very funny, dry delivery when I think she just was like, I am not one of you, family. Somehow I landed here.
I think my favorite was always just, that'll learn them to bust my tomato. That was always my favorite line.
How do you remember that?
I don't know. I just always gravitated towards that line.
I would imagine, Yeardley, it's Bobby again. I would imagine, because I do this radio show and I do things, but a couple years ago I did Dancing with the Stars and I won, but I would be in the airport.
I want to ask you about that.
And you can sure ask me all you want, but I would be in the airport and people would come up to me and they would go, hey, and they wouldn't know me from the radio show or from the books or anything. They'd be like, hey, you're the guy that won Dancing with the Stars, right? And I would be like, yeah. They would go, would you do a dance for me? And I would be in the airport or I would be at a Chick-fil-A and they would want me to bust out a jive. Now, I can imagine if you're somewhere where there are folks, they're coming up to you going, hi, you're the voice of one of those Simpsons. Will you do the voice thing for me? Does that happen to you everywhere?
All the time. And usually I decline. If they ask me for a picture, I'm really 95% of the time say absolutely, let's have a picture. But I feel like, it's not a party trick. It sort of is. It's my job, and it's hopefully something that I've honed as a skill that has some value to it. And it's also kind of weird just to sort of be in a supermarket and go, "Hi, I'm Lisa Simpson. What's your name?" I mean, nothing attracts more attention than breaking into your cartoon character voice in public. Have you
had to learn
They also say, "Oh, could you do my outgoing voicemail?" I'm like, "No."
Oh, no. I get those
not doing
too.
That.
Yeah, and sometimes people will just randomly come up to me with their phone and they're already talking to someone and they haven't said hello and they're like, "Hey, my cousin Jim's on the phone. Will you talk to him for a minute?"
Yes.
And I'm just like, man, there's a whole process before the phone handoff. There's a hello, an ask.
Right?
Yeah. So you also, I guess, when people come up to you, have you had to learn how to draw, Lisa, a little bit?
No, that's such a funny question. So I do these videos on my Instagram and Twitter called Simpsons Sunday, and they're really short, like 2 minutes, 3-minute videos, and in a couple of them, I've said, okay, here's a picture of Lisa Simpson. I'm going to try to draw Lisa Simpson freehand. And it's horrible, and it's hilarious, and there's commentary that goes along with it. And then the first time I did it, the fans were like, "Oh, my God, it's so great, it's so bad. Can we have that?" So I was like, okay. So I forget I held like a little contest, and the winner got my really terrible picture of Lisa Simpson. I'm terrible at it there. The short answer is I can't do it.
Well, I have just one question about The Simpsons. The episodes are 22 minutes long, and I guess when you hop into the booth, or I don't know if you're going into a booth still, or technology allows you to do it from home a bit like we can now too, how long does that usually take to knock out an episode?
Well, we used to, before the pandemic, we would record all together like a radio play, which is actually really unusual for cartoons. When we did, several years ago, we did that crossover with Family Guy, and because it was on their time slot, we recorded in their facility, their studio, and, I went in and did it on my own, did my lines, just wild, one after the other. I had all my scenes were with Mila Kunis, but I didn't even meet her because she wasn't there that day. But for us, our executive producer, James L. Brooks, who comes from sitcom and films, Mary Tyler Moore and Taxi and all these incredible, iconic sitcoms, was like, I don't know why you would treat this any differently. It's still a conversation, and I'm a big fan because even though at this point, after 32 seasons, we're an incredibly well-oiled machine, and when I go in to do ADR, which is, for your listeners who don't know, when you replace dialogue that they've rewritten after the original recording session, I go in and do it myself. But in the original recording, which takes about 4 hours, we go through the scene 4 times, and then if they still don't have what they want, then we'll just do individual lines as pickups. But the way, for instance, I stand between Dan, who does Homer, and Nancy, who does Bart, the way Dan or Nancy or Hank or Julie, who does Marge, says a line is going to inform the way I respond. And so that's my preference. But when the coronavirus hit, we all started to record from home. So because I do the podcast, I already had really good equipment, and that seemed like a pretty good setup. But I really hope that at some point we get back into the studio altogether. I just think it gives it a texture that you can't manufacture on your own just because, if I was next to you, Bobby, and I said, boo, then you would have a reaction to that versus if I was next to you and I said, hey, how are you?
Right. Yeah,
right?
we dealt the same in our studio. We were all working from homes for a while, and there's definitely a vibe difference.
Yes.
in just the production of what we were doing. Well, I didn't know what ADR meant, so thank you. And I also, if I'm admitting to myself, I had to Google what adjudicated meant when you were talking about that earlier. If I'm being completely transparent here. Listen, Yeardley, it's been so nice talking with you. Everyone check out Small Town Dicks, the podcast. And Small Town Dicks, that's a detective. It's a true crime podcast. These are big-time crimes happening in anonymous small-town cities. And I'm going to check it out. Yeardley, it's been so cool to talk to you. Like I said, when I recognized you from Herman's Head, I was like, "Oh, this is awesome! I'm looking forward to this one a lot." So, thank you for your. And I'm gonna follow you back on Instagram. So
yeah, I love it. But thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure. And can I just ask you? I really want to be on Dancing with the Stars. Should we ever all be able to be that close to each other again? Can you just tell me what that was like? Was it great? Was it fun? Was it everything?
Well, do you have any dance? I had no dance experience at all.
I have a little. I took tango for several years.
I think you'd like it because you're trained. If you're like me, I valued the time to be able to work with one of the best in the world. Meaning,
yes.
I never would have been able to do that in my lifetime, to go and train with a dancer every day. I was still doing my radio show and I was touring a little bit, but it was, for me, 12 hours a day because I had no experience. I didn't know what the words meant. It was like when you said adjudicated, when they were like, okay, I had to Google all the words to know, like a sachet. I didn't know what the stuff meant.
Sure.
So for me, it was great in that it was a really positive experience where I got to train with the best and learn. I never got great. I got to be okay. I ended up winning because...
But you won.
I won because the people, right? Because I also realized, just like in life, you can't just be the best at something. You've also got to be the person that people want to work with or want to root for.
100%.
So that was kind of my goal. But I would, if this were an Uber rating, I'd give it 4 3/4 stars. Like, I loved my experience on that show.
Yeah. Oh, I love hearing that. I always say if I wasn't an actress, I would be a professional ballroom dancer.
And
not because I'm so great at it, but that just sounds like heaven to me. I
had no idea that it was as tough as it was until I watched it with my own eyes.
Yeah.
And it is extremely... I would love for you to do it. I can put a text into a couple producers, Yeardley, just say the word.
Yeah, do it.
And when we're back from non-corona, and listen, I don't know if they're going to end up having the season this year. I think right now they're flirting with the bubble idea, where they're going to put all the dancers in which is what we basically lived in anyway.
Right.
But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to text the producer today and say, next season, don't sleep on Yeardley. She's a professional dancer. She just hasn't been exposed to enough professionals yet.
Okay, don't oversell it.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Yeardley, good to talk to you. Hopefully we'll talk again soon in the future.
I'd love it.
All right, bye, Yeardley.
Thanks, Bobby. Bye.
Hey guys, it's Bobby Bones. Welcome to the channel. If you're new to the channel, subscribe and then go check it out. A lot of artists, a lot of songwriters, a lot of music. Welcome to the Bobby Cash channel.